Just one more hour until reinforcements, aka me, arrive to save the day. But until then, keep your eyes on the highway and keep on trucking with Jimmy Mack on Road Gang Radio, y'all.
The only thing that is not complete this year, I do wish our friends from Creek Carrier were with us, because I always love talking with Tim Ashoff about all the plans that he makes to make sure that everybody gets home for Christmas.
Love some Tim.
But we haven't skipped a beat on everything else, by the way. If anybody knows those folks over at Creek Carrier and wants to tell them, hey, man, something really great is kind of cooking over here at RadioNemo.com, especially on the YouTube chat. It is turning into one of the best grab a cup of coffees and say good morning, I think, in the truck and biz. Our good friends Ten Ring and Foraught and Trucker Bosun and Chowder and a whole bunch of other great folks are always over there. You know who you are, the Paranormal Pie Man, Marshall. I can go on for a while. We'll drop some more names. But one of the other traditions we always manage to talk about when Joanne Ritchie and Jim Park of OBAC.ca, OBAC, arrive on the scene for Canada Calling into the arms of their American friends. Boy, this is, as I always say, one of my favorite conversations to have every year, a symbol of hitting the lights and turning the lights on a friendship that endures because of one country's generosity to another, has actually in turn given away to one of the grandest traditions in regards to North America. And Joanne and Jim are here to talk about it. Good morning to you both.
Good morning to you, Jimmy Mack.
Joanne, I'm going to let you kind of take point on this. You know, Dean is not in Boston right now. He normally would have seen it this evening, but he's on his way to Reeds Across America's Truck Drivers Lounge. That was, by the way, that's the only thing that makes it acceptable that he's missing that. But tell folks what's going on in Boston tonight, and then tell them why it's going on in Boston.
I think if this is certainly proof that certain bonds of friendship can't be broken, even by nasty trade wars. Anyway, the huge celebration in Boston tonight that Boston Mayor Michelle Wu and Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, they'll flip the switch on more than 5,000 lights that decorate a 45-foot tree from Nova Scotia. And the tree is an annual thank you gift from the people of Nova Scotia to the people of Boston for relief efforts following the 1917 explosion of a munition ship in Halifax Harbor. So this year's tree is a 45-foot white spruce donated by Ronald and Claire Feener of Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia. And by the way, it's a big competition every year in Nova Scotia to see who is going to be the lucky folks that donate the tree. Anyway, this year, so the celebration really begins in November sometime with the festive public tree cutting ceremony on the property of the donors. And this year, for the first time, the mayor of Boston took place in the celebration. A little bit of extra reaching out to their northern neighbors. So then the tree was wrapped and loaded and headed for Halifax, where the huge official opening or send-off celebration takes place. So that was a couple of weeks ago. And it's the Nova Scotia Department of Public Works. They're responsible for cutting and loading and delivering the tree. So Sheldon Garland, that we've spoken to a couple of times on the radio, he was the lead driver who took the tree on its 700-mile journey. And it makes a couple of stops along the way. It's a 2-day trip they turn it into with, and they pull in at a couple of the truck stops along the way, both in Canada and the U.S., and then the tree arrived with much fanfare on the Boston Common a couple of weeks ago, where it was unloaded and decorated and ready for the big ceremony that takes place tonight. So the celebration, I'd love to go. Actually, I did go to this when I was a child, and I used to spend time in Boston with relatives there. The tree, there's lots of music from both the U.S. and Nova Scotia artists, sampling village, they call it, with food and refreshments from both countries. And then besides the tree, they turn on 50,000 other lights throughout the Boston Common and the public garden. So it's quite an impressive show. Ends with fireworks, and I think it's actually a drone show this year. So Not to get too sappy here, but as Mayor Wu says, this special gift reinforces the neighborly bond that our communities have shared for over a century, and it reminds us of the true meaning of holiday spirit. That's what's taking place tonight in Boston. If you're anywhere closer, I think the local radio station actually is streaming it live as well. And the tree has its own Facebook page and Instagram account, I think, as well.
I think it's so interesting to have this conversation now because there's been so much discussion. I don't know if you guys know, but we had on the author of the book about the Edmund Fitzgerald, and of course, it is the 50th anniversary of a lot of really sad stuff involving what I would call cross-border stuff, and it's been a really testy time, and it's just a really kind of great reminder. It could not come at a more perfect time between the two countries if people will actually take the time to really study the history around that. And I was thinking of you. This is a random thought, Joanne. Dean and I just had a really great conversation about AI, and you talk about this all the time. The idea of the useless information. What is the point of it? But I got to tell you, man, without useless information and without specifics like that, it makes AI prompts. It turns them into slop. The difference between a slop AI response and a good AI response is actually when the prompter has what people often say, that's useless information. It's not. It's the kind of thing that specifies and really grounds things in human beings. And this is a real story. This story, from beginning to end, is an amazing story of honor and courage and bravery and decency. Chokes me up a little bit, too. The full story in its breadth is just devastating and utterly uplifting at the same time, don't you think?
Yeah, we've talked about this a number of times, and I think there's a heightening, or has been an awareness of actually why we celebrate. I know I've heard people say that they go to that celebration every year, but before people actually start talking about it on the radio and on shows like this, that they sometimes don't understand the backstory, which is really interesting. And I know that probably a lot more people, especially Americans, know it now. But just quickly, it was actually. It'll be December 6th, so 2 days from now, 108 years ago, there was a French cargo ship, the SS Mont Blanc, and it collided with a Norwegian vessel, the SS Emo, in the Halifax harbor. This was in the early days of the First World War. And the Norwegian ship was en route to New York to take relief supplies to Belgium, and the Mont Blanc was laden with high explosives. So it caught fire and exploded, and that's the disaster that's known as the Halifax Explosion. The blast remains the worst pre-nuclear explosion. It's still that. It's the equivalent to energy of roughly 2.9 kilotons of TNT. So immediately, nearly every structure within a half-mile radius of the harbor was obliterated by the blast, and more than 2,000 people were killed, and 9,000 were injured, thousands homeless. And then to make matters worse, the perfect condition for a nor'easter had developed by the afternoon, and it was a cold and bitterly cold, and the city was in the middle of a raging blizzard on top of all this. So within 24 hours of the disaster, the city of Boston sent 2 trains filled with medical supplies and equipment for a 500-bed hospital and doctors and nurses, and they continued to support the relief effort. Things like the Boston Symphony holding a benefit concert just 10 days after the explosion. So the following year, 1918, Halifax sent the tree to Boston as a thank you gift for their help. And then the gift was revived in 1971 by the Nova Scotia government as a goodwill gesture, and that's been an annual tradition ever since. This was, and of course, this year it's gone on through pandemics, through all kinds of things. And this year was a particularly testy year. As you know, many Canadians are staying away from the U.S. for various reasons. But Park, you told me about an interesting thing you read about a poll that was done of the people in Nova Scotia to see whether the tree should be sent or not. Do you want to mention that?
Yeah, it was a radio talk show in Halifax, and there was some debate naturally about whether or not Nova Scotia or Halifax should maintain their tradition of sending the tree down, given all the friction and tension between the U.S. and Canada, and was it a good idea to do this, or to just forget it and move on? And overwhelmingly, like 1,600 to 8 or something, they said the comments from the listeners were totally positive. Yes, send the tree. Let's keep this going. Let's transcend all the wickedness and nastiness that's going on, and we'll show the world that we're bigger and better than all that other unpleasant stuff. So not that anything would have stopped or changed because of that poll, but I think it was indicative of the the spirit of the folks in Halifax, and people wanted to maintain that tradition. So that was kind of heartening, to be honest.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually say this too. I think it helps too, given the fact that a majority of people in the state of Massachusetts might actually have a great deal more sympathy than other sections of the United States of America for both the project and for the people of Canada, given their proximity and how many friends are kind of shared in that neck of the woods, or at least in that neck of Boston and the greater Massachusetts area, which is kind of a really groovy thing as well too. Jim, that is such a great thing to remind people of, though. At the end of the day, there's a moment in the HBO series Rome where, at the end of the Civil War, two of the people who are surrendering show up to tell Caesar they're sorry, and they surrender. And he says, first of all, don't be sorry. Second of all, don't surrender. We were friends. We argued. That's what families do. Let's sit down and have a meal. And however this ends, the tree is a great symbol of how the friendship, in fact, is going to continue beyond one moment in time or one controversy or any of that kind of stuff. It's just a great story. One of the things, guys, this morning, I got to pivot here because I could spend the entire morning talking about acts of heroism. That's an entire show unto itself, and Joanne knows a lot about that. But I want to kind of pivot to something that Jim wrote on trucknews.com, and it's really an important read, and I'm going to see if we can get this one posted as well, maybe in the show notes. This is really groovy, guys. A lot of the chat this morning, Jim, has really been weather focused. It's -13, by the way, over in Waterloo, Iowa. Even as far down as Oklahoma, our good friend Trucker Bosun is freezing his tuchus off. The first comment in the chat, Jim, was, "Yo, it's cold." Straight up. Which
yeah, -13 is pretty cold.
Yeah, I mean, it's just...
You're not sitting here in Ottawa where it's really cold.
Cold?
Anyway.
You have no idea what cold is. Cold? Yeah. But, Jim, you've written something really terrific, and it's a great reminder of why infrastructure repair is so important, why maintenance rather than repair is a really smart idea when it comes to roads, particularly in the winter. I'm kind of paraphrasing here a bit, but can you kind of unpack that for our listeners?
Yeah, this story was called Reading the Road. And it's kind of it's a lot of what you would call tribal knowledge, stuff that old guys know because they've been around a lot and learned stuff. And maybe new drivers aren't getting that kind of information passed down to them from old guys, or they're just missing it somewhere. So I thought I'd write up, comments from a couple of expert driver trainers who got some experience, understand the way things work. And it was basically, what can you do to tell the condition of the road that you're driving on? In winter, of course, conditions change and ice appears here and there, which could be pretty tricky to deal with. But there's usually telltale signs that you're coming into some nasty weather or nasty conditions. Not always obvious just looking out the window, but there are signs. For example, If you're driving on, dark pavement that may be wet or may be icy, you're not quite sure. The temperature's kind of hovering around, the freezing mark and could go one way or the other. Look at the tires of the truck ahead of you and see if there's any spray coming off the tires. If there's spray coming off the tires, it's still wet, therefore not iced yet. But if there's no spray and the road is shiny, then you're probably driving on ice. Just, a little bit of a clue there to slow down and be careful. Those are things that, maybe they don't tell you in driving school, especially if you're, learning to drive somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line. You may not be getting that kind of information from your instructors because they may not know it either. Another useful thing, especially in Western Canada, any place where the road tends to get obscured, or at least sunshine doesn't always make it to the pavement. You can be driving along on a relatively sunny day, when it's kind of cool, and the road's dry and bare and everything's fine. And then you go under an underpass, or you go through an area of road that's because of trees or mountains or whatever the case may be, tall buildings even. The sun doesn't get a chance to shine on the road and warm it. So it stays cold under the underpasses where the sun doesn't reach it. Well, because it's not heated by the sun, ice that formed overnight can remain there on the road. So if you're coming around a corner or a bend in the road and you go under an underpass, just think and bear in mind that it could in fact still be icy under there. Even though the road on either side of the bridge is fine, it could be pretty icy under the underpass or in the shadows of mountains and trees and what have you. That's useful to think about. The other sort of one that I wanted to emphasize in this story was that bridges, you often see signs, especially up here, bridge may freeze before roadway or something to that effect. The reason for that is because the ground retains heat from the sun, and it takes a while for the frost to set in. But on a bridge deck, for example, there's nothing there to retain the heat. So you'll often find that a bridge deck, especially one that goes over water, not necessarily an overpass, but something that goes over water, the moisture will form on the bridge deck and it'll freeze because, like I said, there's nothing there in the bridge deck to retain the heat the way it does on dry land. So you can be going down a relatively dry piece of road and then hit the bridge, and suddenly you're skating across it because now the bridge deck is turned to ice, but the pavement around it is still dry. So conditions like that, you're best to take your foot off the throttle and let the truck kind of coast over the hill, so you're not putting any torque to the wheels one way or the other, braking or accelerating. Just let it roll out across that, and you'll probably stay in control and everything will be fine. When you get across the bridge, put your foot back on the throttle and carry on.
Jim, it's really interesting, by the way. We had Chris Orban of Journey TMS actually joined us in studio to have a conversation. He's from Boston originally, and it got cold here yesterday. That's not even fair. I mean, yeah, it was yesterday morning, and it was like a 32 degree with the wind chill factor, and he was laughing because he said all those years in Boston, and he'd never experienced the kind of cold that we get down here very on about once a month in the winter, once or twice a weekend in the winter. The problem we have down here is everybody thinks that because it snows in New Orleans, that's why they'll shut the city down. That's not what's causing it. We have so many bridges, Jim and Joanne, that go over bodies of water that you see these signs everywhere that just basically, they're there permanently that say, don't forget these bridges ice sooner than the roads do. And, people who are not from here will laugh about it. But the amount of humidity and the amount of moisture that is in the air and the number of bridges that are required to kind of make an interstate happen in the southeastern part of Louisiana, the moment the weather goes to freezing, if it stays there, they really start shutting things down because it's almost
Yeah.
impossible not to get people skidding around. It's the best piece of advice in a already great article. I want to share this with people, by the way, because I'm proud of this lead that Jim wrote, proud to know him. You never forget your first time, not that first time, the first time you suddenly realize you've lost traction and you're sliding along at the whim of the gods. The pucker factor is off the scale. Couldn't have said it better myself, Jim. Well said, by the way.
Try and get people's attention with the first sentence, you know?
Yeah, a nice piece of lead right there, by the way. And it really is important. One of the things that I noticed that a lot of CDL programs and then a lot of onboarding doesn't do is just kind of have a day where it's like, let's talk about cold weather. Let's talk about what happens when it's not flooded, but it's getting close. We don't kind of give people the tips. The tree tip, by the way, is spectacular. It's another problem that happens in Louisiana. I know we're talking about Canadian winter conditions for the most part, but of course that applies to the absolute northern part of Minnesota and the Upper Peninsula in Michigan and large portions of Maine. But a lot of these tips actually work for places that get just enough cold to have at least one or two cold snaps of the year. They do. The Mid-Atlantic states come to mind, and it's a really helpful article for those who haven't checked it out. I will get on top of the turtle to see if she can post it in the comments on the show today. We got a lot of stuff to kind of unpack. And by the way, before we run out of time here, let's get to the better late than never file, Jim, shall we?
Yeah, this one is well. I'm cautiously optimistic about this. The last few weeks, month or so, we've been hearing about all the shenanigans in your country, especially California, with non-domiciled CDLs and driving school people being kicked out unceremoniously for not having the qualifications and experience and what have you. And I looked sort of somewhat enviously south, thinking, FMCSA is doing something positive and concrete here by taking action to get some of these folks off the road and to try and change the system so people can't take advantage of it. We've had similar problems here in Ontario for as long as, well, probably going on 10 years now, ever since this MELT program started. And for whatever reason, they claim it's a lack of resources. But the ministry responsible for doing driving school audits and checks and inspections just hasn't been going out doing it. It's unbelievable, but in Ontario, at least, any sort of private career college or any institution that calls itself a college or a learning environment is supposed to be governed by the province under this Ministry of College and Universities. And that group has some enforcement component to what they do. And they are supposed to be auditing and inspecting, the schools that are under the purview of that ministry. Hairdressing schools, for example, cooking schools, stuff where you can do some really serious damage. They seem to get their inspections and their audits, but they have not been, for the last couple of years, doing anything about the fly-by-night driving schools that have proliferated in certain parts of the country, or certain parts of the province, really. So finally, there was an announcement from the Ministry of Colleges and Universities that they're going to start doing that, going to start doing unannounced inspections, just dropping into these schools and saying, okay, get all your paperwork out, let's have a look at it and make sure you're doing things right. So I don't know if that's actually going to happen, or maybe they'll do one or two schools, have a press release, and the minister will say something, and that'll be it. It'll be all back to normal after that. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're going to finally start this, but Jesus, it's beyond about time. These schools have been operating with impunity. They're not technically doing anything like illegal, other than just not doing what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know if it's illegal or not. I don't think it is. But they push people through these schools and they send them off to their tests, and they're clearly not ready. So they're thwarting, the basically good intentions of the MELT program and using it to their advantage because they can, because nobody's watching them. When the cat's away, the mice will play, they say. And that's what's going on here. So hopefully hopefully this announcement will change that, and maybe we can start getting a few of these schools either put out of business or getting them reined in so they're doing the right thing. But there's so many of them, it'll take ages for a hand excuse me a handful of inspectors to make their way around the province doing all the necessary audits. But hey, it's a start.
Well, and the other thing about the
Happy for what we
start,
get.
and I'd love to get some thoughts from Joanne before we wrap this up. It is a start, though, but I will tell you, we were talking about the reining in of the non-domicile drivers. We were talking about the idea of going after these fly-by-nighters. There is the kind of thing about the short, sharp shock. The idea that if they really think you're serious and you continue to behave in a serious fashion about this, I wouldn't be surprised if a number of these places simply evaporate. And that's always an interesting thing, too, Jim, the idea that when people get really serious about enforcing things like that, I'm interested to see how much safer the highways get over the next couple of months here in the United States. But I'm also curious to see how many of these fly-by-nighters fly. And that might be an interesting thing, too, that some of it might be not self-policing, but, staying one step ahead of the sheriff and getting out when the getting's good. Joanne, I wanted to make sure that we got a chance for you to kind of comment, not just on what Jim and I are specifically talking about, but the training methodologies and the ideas about training and, if you have any hope or possibility for what comes next.
Yeah, well, I'm always anytime I get a chance to voice this particular opinion, I do. And I still think that we also need to look at the entities that are giving people coming out of those schools the license. That's the whole licensing. It's in our country. There's no connection between the entities that do the training and the entities that actually give the license. And I think we often forget that and focus on training, the schools, and then the ministry just kind of, get away with it if they will. So I'd like to see a really strong, coordinated effort by both those entities, the training sides and the licensing side. That I think until then it's never really going to get too much better.
By the way, the turtle says good morning to you both. Our good friend Touchdown Tara Garris says good morning, and we are glad to have her on board. Bruce Almighty tells the turtle good morning, and you guys as well. And then Steve, by the way, will have the final word of this segment. Politics has nothing to do with friendship. Friends, families first before politics. I could not agree more. Thank you, Steve. And it's why we have the best neighbor the world has ever known, exemplified by our friends Jim Park and Joanne Ritchie, who join us on a regular basis for Canada Calling into the arms of Radio Nemo. Good morning to you. And I'm going to see if I can get a couple of glances at that Christmas tree as well. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Joanne. Talk to you.